A little wolf pup unexpectedly found itself surrounded by large, hostile bears in the middle of the untamed wilderness. The little wolf was imprisoned, terrified, and appeared to have no hope as it faced inevitable doom. However, just when things were getting out of hand, an unthinkable thing happened. So remarkable that, deep inside the untamed splendor of the vast, sprawling landscape, it left everyone in awe. Forest life develops in cycles of mild collaboration and intense rivalry. A world where survival is determined by the raw power of nature, a careful balance between the might of predators and prey, and fragility, and even the tiniest creatures must muster the fortitude to survive in this harsh environment or risk becoming just another untold tale in the infinite wilderness. Morning, a small wolf pup named Shadow glistened in the bright light of dawn beneath the canopy of tall trees. Scarcely old enough to hunt Shadow, she went far from her family's safety because of her naive curiosity, approaching the boundary of her pack's domain into hazardous and uncharted areas, oblivious to the dangers that lurked beneath the majestic beauty Shadow, which was eagerly investigated. Her innocent, playful steps were filled with sniffing flowers and chasing butterflies. And wonder, yet peace, particularly in the outdoors, can be broken in an instant. The air suddenly became stiff and thick, and there was an eerie hush. Shadow sensed danger, too. When Late looked up, she was encircled by imposing, terrifying bears who towered over her with their enormous bodies. Their eyes gleamed with primordial intensity, dwarfing her little, frail frame. Every second felt like an eternity as their powerful limbs moved restlessly. From a distance, Shadow's instincts told her that she couldn't escape, and her small heart pounded with fear. The bears and the frightened puppy were unaware of the human watcher's eyes. A team of local wildlife photographers and naturalists' mouths dropped, their breath seized in their throats as horror cams widened. Every witness struggled with the terrible conviction of what was going to occur, and their minds were racing with the idea of nature's strict regulations claim another innocent life. Is there anything that could change the sad destiny that felt inevitable but is terrifying? Tighten its hold on everyone who wanted to see something remarkable happen. A twist so surprising and beautiful that, disregarded the harsh law of nature, what would follow next would not only leave the observer stunned, but would also question all of their preconceived notions about animals' sympathy and instincts. The tale of Shadow, the brave little wolf, whose horrific ordeal exposed the incredible potential for kindness and courage in the natural world. A tale so gripping and surprising that it won over the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Started a discussion that went much beyond the thick forest where it took place. The woodland was a sanctuary of gentle secrets and quiet whispers in the early morning hours, where each leaf and ray, deep within this ancient woodland, the promise of a new day was carried by the rays of sunlight. Shadow, the little wolf pup, went farther than she had ever gone before, having left her family's protecting embrace to pursue an unidentified goal, and she ended up finding herself. The ground, which was deserted on a small, curving road, was wet with dew and the cool. The lines between earth and sky Shadow's fur were blurred by the mist that clung to the undergrowth. It was a mixture of silvery gray and, as she slowly went along the trail, her eyes still wide with fear, silky brown glistened in the early morning light. With an instinct developed over years of survival in the wild, her youthful innocence tiredly searched her surroundings, was motivated by a natural curiosity, yet she felt an unsaid tension at every turn. She felt as though the forest, which is typically a sight of wonder, held its breath. As she proceeded farther into the forest, the tranquility was suddenly broken by a low, rumbling sound that was virtually, initially inaudible, started to reverberate through the trees, causing the forest floor to quiver a little and the air to become thicker. Shadow's heart thumped in her chest, and her ears pricked with an eerie intensity. In the distance, through the morning mist curtain, a cluster of massive bears, huge, strong animals with black eyes, appeared as figures. Gleaming intensely, they moved forward along the trail one by one, their weight hefty. Before Shadow could really understand the danger, footsteps echoed in the silence like a drum beat, The bears started too. Their massive bodies loomed around her, casting long shadows across her small frame. The dominating bear, a big man with a thick shaggy coat, advanced with almost. The others arranged themselves in a semicircle, trapping shadow against the regal authority. The massive presence of these predators, whose size and strength overshadowed her frail body and the old trees, body caused the young wolf to experience a brief spike in anxiety. Stop. The woodland was quiet except for the low growl that rumbled and the quick pounding of Shadow's heart. Fear gripped her more tightly from the bears, and her instincts begged her to go, but every route of escape was. Shadow's little shaking body stopped, and tears filled her eyes as she was blocked by the powerful circle of bears. In that terrifying moment, surrounded by beings of sheer might, she realized that she was in danger. Felt completely exposed and alone in a world that didn't give a damn about the weak as the tension in the clearing mounted. The dominant bear that had been in the lead abruptly changed. The circle, with a mixture of territorial instinct and curiosity, made a tentative step forward, but its eyes were not. Rather, with the typical predatory appetite, there was an unexplained flicker of doubt. For unclear reasons, the bear paused as though it might have recognized the little wolf's fervent cry, since it felt something peculiar about her presence. Eyes. Or perhaps the bear's behavior was unusual for some reason that even nature was unable to fully explain. For a brief moment, the perfect formation was broken by the dominant bear's hesitancy, and a tense murmur spread through the circle. A horrific, unanticipated catastrophe occurred during that split second of uncertainty when the dominating bear dropped its head for a careful examination. One of the lesser bears suddenly leaped from the circle. The assault came suddenly, and vicious claws with exposed teeth extended. The bear's motion was like a lightning strike, piercing the clearing and ending the fleeting moment of uncertainty. Shadow, ensnared in the midst of this unexpected violence, fled in terror as, moments before, the formerly tranquil forest was enraged by the bear's unbridled fury. In the resulting turmoil, the noises of a fierce struggle now echoed the peaceful hush. Any witnesses were sent chills when the dominant bear let out a roar that reverberated through the forest. The little wolf, concealed in the shadows, was overcome by a mixture of terror and a desperate need to survive, and it started to flee. The woodland was filled with pure, unadulterated terror due to the bear's roars and their paw thunder. Had once promised a peaceful rebirth, but was now a battlefield where the harsh laws of nature were in effect. Huge when the dust settled and the frantic attack's echoes started to diminish. The commotion was replaced by heartbreaking silence, and Shadow's existence now depended on her fate. Her capacity to flee the wild's grasp and the bear's erratic fury at that crucial juncture. The little wolf pup's fight for survival in the forest witnessed both the harshness and the fleeting beauty of life. Reached a horrifying turning point amid the unadulterated cruelty of nature, one that would permanently change the trajectory of her life and make a lasting impression on the hearts of those who subsequently told the story in the tumultuous wake of the woodland appeared to hold its breath during the vicious bear attack, and the clearing was left in ruins after the ferocious clash. The sounds of roaring and frenzied footsteps still echoing among the leaves combined with the disturbed earth. Trees in the midst of this chaos, tiny shadows future hung in the steady. The small wolf pup, whose heart had just been racing with fear, shivered, about to succumb to the tremendous wrath of nature as a few local wildlife photographers and naturalists who had observed the mayhem started to calm down. Emily was among others who hurried toward the clearing in a startling scene from a distance. A kind-hearted woman who was well known for having a great deal of empathy for wild animals. Her heart raced with a mixture of terror and resolve as she crouched next to the shaky puppy, reassuring him that everything will be all right. Emily's gaze met Shadow's and a mute animal closer at that delicate moment. A pledge was made between them that, in spite of the bloodshed, hope was still conceivable. The immediate aftermath prompted a rush of critical decisions, prompting local wildlife specialists to brought their voices together urgently to evaluate the situation. Dr. Rivera, with a small crew, An experienced veterinarian with experience in wildlife rehabilitation arrived on the spot, studied Shadow closely, observing the significant scrapes and shock-related symptoms that tarnished the puppy's once bright eyes. Despite the severity of the injuries, recovery is possible with prompt care, she noted. Her words, though measured, conveyed the weight of urgency in a tone that combined clinical precision with genuine care. That struck a chord with everyone in attendance, as the rescuers worked with the local activists, hikers, and bystanders, started to assemble their voices, quivering with a mix of wonder and grief among. They were Jack, a local hiker whose hands trembled as he recorded the earlier events in his journal. Every element, from the clearing's chaos to the puppy's terrified eyes, contributed to Jack's growing internal struggle. Had entered the woodland in search of some alone time and a chance to commune with nature, and now he was seeing the unadulterated savagery of life and the frantic fight for survival that ensued in the hours after the assault. Tensions developed among individuals who were watching the drama play out, as well as between nature and human intervention. Some claimed that the brutality of the wild was an unchangeable reality and a harsh reminder that nature didn't care about. This is the way it is. One cynical voice in the crowd said that predators rule and the weaker went on their own, but a group of people led by Emily and Dr. Rivera. Emily retorted with passionate appeals for compassion, saying that every creature deserves a chance, and that if we can provide even a glimmer of compassion, we must. The conflict between these viewpoints sparked contentious discussions among the audience. As rescuers prepped and stabilized Shadow, they exposed a profound crack in the community's understanding of the outdoors. Another turn in the developing drama started to take shape in order to send her to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Mr. Thompson, a local park ranger, arrived at the scene after hearing about his aged visage, etched with years of experience, displayed a mixture of worry and annoyance that I've witnessed in He remarked quietly, "There's a fair share of violence in these woods, but this was different." His comment added a layer of anxiety, since it seemed like something in our midst had gone against the basic order of nature, implying that the assault may have been a component of a wider, darker pattern of intentional disturbance, and a Shadow was given immediate care at the rehabilitation facility. Those who followed the events had intense emotions, and social media erupted with real-time reports and videos of the tumultuous scene and sincere tweets advocating for wildlife conservation, such as Niche Save Shadow and Wild Compassion, started to gain popularity locally, inspiring support from the community and instigating a more extensive conversation regarding human accountability in the natural world. The digital explosion not only highlighted a one-pup's predicament, while also highlighting a shared desire for a kinder more. The emotional stakes were just as high for the rescue team because of their sympathetic relationship with the animals. Dr. Rivera and her co-workers speculated about the incident's cause while working non-stop to save Shadow from the edge. Beginnings: did the attack start as a single, sad incident, or did it stem from human meddling that may be connected to illicit activity in the area? Their private discussions, full of uncertainty and resolve, suggested the potential for a network of exploitation or an underlying conspiracy that could have affected other wildlife as well in the midst of Emily's emotional and practical struggles. As her inward journey went on, she discovered that she was caught between the need to care for others and her dread of becoming. She sat by her window every night, too devoted to a creature whose fate was so uncertain. She considered the impermanence of life and the pressing need to preserve it while she watched the rain and the soft sway of the trees. "I can't help but believe that this small pup's survival is a sign that we should reconsider how we engage with nature," she told a close friend over the phone, and her words served as a moving reminder that occasionally, in the middle of these contradictory feelings, the most tragic occurrences may also ignite the brightest sparks of hope. Considering real-world difficulties, the situation reached a turning point, and the community is now sharply split between acceptance of the harsh laws of nature and the moral need to save and defend was about to happen. Every fresh piece of information, every passionate plea, and every action that could reshape their relationship with the wild, from the rescuers and each sincere comment from the online community, came together to form one indisputable fact. The fight for Shadow was about more than just rescuing a single animal. It was about contesting the idea that apathy and recovering the capacity for empathy at the moment when it appeared that the little wolf pup Shadow had arrived at the point of certain death beneath the suffocating bear circle. A spooky silence fell over the clearing. An already tense atmosphere underwent a significant change that no one could have predicted as the dominating. With a sly gleam in its eyes, the bear advanced, poised to strike with the last blow. Something in the air appeared to alter the anticipated snarl or outburst of aggression. The bear stopped. Its enormous head suddenly fell as though it were struck with an unexplainable sadness. The woodland held its breath in that hush for a long, heart-stopping time. The dominant bear made a somber wail sound that was so eerie and depressing that it sent chills down people's spines. The cry sent shivers down everyone's spines because it wasn't your usual growl or roar. It was a mournful, nearly human cries that reverberated through the trees, leaving the other bears shocked. Sudden emotional outburst and bewilderment swept through them. Ranks what would have caused a creature known for its aggressiveness to exhibit such an unusual reaction as. The bear's close-knit circle started when the dominating bear let out a mournful scream. The group members hesitated before acting aggressively, causing them to split apart one by one. The togetherness that once delineated their predatory line now softens as they exchange hesitant glances, appeared to collapse, with an internal discord emerging in its place. The young wolf pup, now shaking with fear, stared in confusion as the bears, who were typically a powerful force, focused inward before twisting in a way that would alter the course of events permanently. The abrupt emergence of another figure in the room broke the silence. A sleek, sinuous shape emerges from the thick shadows at the edge of the woodland. A lynx, a predator unlike any other seen that day, appeared. The lynx's muscles moved with a silent predatory grace, its golden eyes glimmering with a mix of cunning and hunger. As it looked around at the chaos among the bears, its spotted fur rippled beneath it, and the sight of the lens shocked it. The dominant bear, still reeling from its unexplained grief, screamed in defiance as waves passed through the clearing, trying to rally its friends. But the connections were quick and well calculated, using a number of. With its claws unsheathed, it leaped between the bewildered bears with agility. And prepared, the scenario plunged into tumultuous violence in a flash. The formerly cohesive group of bears is now in chaos due to internal strife and the unexpected arrival of the fresh. Roars mixed with the terrified yelps of predators as they started to fight among themselves. The lynx, as the conflict grew into a furious altercation, shadowed the small wolf. The puppy who had been the target of the bear's original hostility was now enmeshed in a whirlpool of. Nevertheless, there wasn't much space for escape during the bear's and Lynn's frantic skirmish, and for a while it seemed that she could be killed as collateral in the resulting pandemonium. Because of Lynx's relentless attacks on the disorderly bears, there was a window of opportunity and a vulnerable time. Chaos that could still enable the small puppy to escape the lethal arena. However, as the dust settled from the unexpected encounter, a horrifying reality surfaced from the carnage in the middle of the fray. Weakened by the sudden emotional outburst and the lynx's fierce onslaught, the dominant bear fell to the ground. Its enormous body trembling with panting gasps. The bear's descent was not merely the outcome of battle. It seemed as though the burden of its own grief had grown too great to handle in. The entire clearing appeared to freeze the lynx at that startling moment, stopped in the middle of their leap, and the other bears gathered unsurely around their fallen leader, their stern faces softening by surprise and bewilderment for the onlookers concealed within the woods and captured on camera by the quivering eyes of the surrounding wildlife. Photographers found the scene to be both horrifying and captivating. Pup, who had been paralyzed by dread, felt that the dynamics had changed. The dominant bear is now prone, irrevocably, and the other bears are temporarily confused by the abrupt betrayal of their unity. Dawn started to come to terms with what they had seen was a meticulously planned chain reaction rather than just a natural occurrence. Triggered in that moment by forces both inside and outside the animal kingdom, the lynx's eyes flared with a chilly determination, It appeared as like the new predator had been sketched rather than just showing up. The lynx's appearance was planned by the same evil forces that caused the bear's ranks to suddenly collapse. Combined with the collapse of the dominating bear, indicated a troubling potential that the assault on the young wolf pup may have been coerced or perhaps taken advantage of by invisible forces, possibly human remains, disruption, or the outcome of a long-forgotten, twisted natural order in which predators turned against one another. In other circumstances, the revelation caused a tremor to spread among the gathered witnesses. That nature's instincts did not randomly clash in this tumultuous, violent conflict, but, for the first time, it was both terrifying and transforming to consider that it might be a sign of deeper, sinister influences. The young wolf pup's fate, as well as the delicate equilibrium of the entire woodland ecosystem, hung in a unstable equilibrium between the harsh rules of nature and a possible, disturbing tampering with those laws. While the lynx and the confused bears persisted in their battle, the woodland was left the once dreadful circle of silence heavy with foreboding. The tumultuous fury had given way to a somber tableau of helplessness and remorse as predators had broken apart. With its future undetermined and its fate tragic, Wolf Pup Shadow now stood frightened in the midst of this bizarre aftermath, warning that in the wild, even the tiniest creature could unintentionally fall prey to far stronger forces. Does this block work for you on its own? If so, should I proceed to development, responses, and modifications to the 800-word characters in the 4th development quarter? The altered circumstances following the fierce altercation when the bear was lying down, and the LYX had finished its unexpected foray and had fled into the shadowy undergrowth. There was a deep, almost unreal silence in the clearing, and all living things, either the predator or the observer, appeared to pause in contemplation, as if all pretense had been stripped away by the sudden outburst of chaos, which compelled an honest reckoning with the harsh realities of nature. The world had changed irrevocably for Shadow, the young wolf pup, just before terror had rendered her immobile, since she was encircled by looming bears, the dominant bear now prone, and the group in chaos. Shadow, she crept out from the center of the scene, her big, terrified eyes flickering with a glint of cautious optimism, clearing naturally in search of safety amid the bushes. But even as she sought refuge, her petite frame remained a symbol of calm fortitude, a glimmer of. Shadow's responses were a combination of life that defied the odds amid that silence, of fragility and developing survival instincts, as though this violent experience was teaching her how to. The thin line separating potential safety from terror, not far from the clearing, tucked up among the thick foliage, a collection of naturalists and wildlife photographers who had first observed the ensuing mayhem. A seasoned photographer started to whisper among themselves in dread. Michael steadied his hands while he took pictures of the aftermath, adjusting his focus. "I've never seen anything like this," he mumbled, his voice a mix of amazement and adrenaline still pumping through his veins, and sadness, as though the forest itself is calling for assistance and change. Others who understood that the violent encounter was more than just a singular instance of rapacious mayhem, but a driving force that has compelled every creature, including one of the local naturalists, Sarah, encouraged the human witnesses to face the more profound scars of their surroundings. Her eyes were wide with anguish as she was attracted to the clearing by someone's sympathetic disposition. Looked at the fallen bear, the lynx that was running away, and the young wolf pup. "I've witnessed nature at her most cruel, but today it feels different," she whispered, shuddering in the low light. The episode evoked thoughts of Sarah's own struggles in a gentle manner, as if she was afraid to disturb the delicate serenity. And she felt a strong connection to the creature's struggle for survival as she observed Shadow's hesitant movements. "Must take note of this," she muttered to her colleague, in order to safeguard not only the strong but also the weak. The animal community's response back in the forest center was equally complicated. The bears were once a united force, now moved erratically, its combative stances tempered by bewilderment and the aftereffects of their leader's downfall caused a natural hierarchy to be upset, leaving the surviving members in confusion and even the often vicious predators appeared to exhibit a momentary. Nevertheless, the lynx that had abruptly and violently emerged now vanished into the darkness as though its aim had been achieved. The carnivore's chaotic condition highlighted a small but significant indication that the natural order was changing and that the power dynamics had been overturned by both visible and invisible forces, while the human aspect of the situation was changing quickly as local media started to report in the days that followed. The remarkable occurrences using a combination of empathy and sensationalism. Journalists spoke with eyewitnesses and the video of the lynx's swift onslaught and the dominating bear's melancholy wail went viral and generated a lot of emotions on social media, with some viewers expressing indignation at the encounter's harshness. Others are in awe of the unadulterated, unfiltered portrayal of the complexity of nature. Online conversations revealed a trend with hashtags like #ChCrazyReckoning and #ChDesireForShadow. There was a split in the community between those who thought the episode was a tragic anomaly and those who thought it was an indication of. Among these voices, several local conservationists started to wonder about a more profound environmental imbalance, whether the violent altercation was completely natural or if other forces, possibly even human ones, had an impact. Interference intended to alter the forest's delicate balance occasionally provided an explanation for it. According to an environmental scientist at a community forum, apex predators' odd behavior may be a reaction to stress, such as habitat invasion or even illicit activity in the region today. It could be the beginning of something we've been neglecting for too long. His calm remarks struck a chord with some, but others responded with suspicion, escalating the discussion about the incident's best interpretation. Jack, who had been at the forefront of the investigation, sensed the pressure growing within this volatile milieu of accountability. He wrote passionately in his diary that evening while seated by his campfire. His comments were a blend of, he wrote with unadulterated passion and unwavering determination that all the creatures in this forest are interrelated. Occurred today serves as a sobering reminder that brutality, whether intentional or natural, causes wounds on everyone. I see a glimmer of optimism amid the chaos, but I also fear the shadow. His reflections emphasized not only the cruelty of the wild, but also the pressing need for kindness and safety. The emotional struggle that many members of the village were going through, which was between accepting the harshness of nature and realities and the urgent need to take action to mend the harm caused by both human avarice and natural forces as the Ernest started the process of rebuilding and adjusting to this new reality as the woodland gradually returned to an unsettling stillness. More vigilant than ever, local wildlife rescue organizations have organized patrols and more frequent community gatherings and heightened area monitoring aimed at averting more disasters, with residents and authorities debating how to balance the wild's unpredictable nature in a contentious but productive manner. Given that human intervention is required in every area of the forest and in every community, the questions continue to ask how compassion can coexist with nature's innate ability to protect the weak. Cruelty in the small wolf pup shadow's mixture of mayhem and cautious optimism persisted in moving over the altered terrain, silently defying the forces that wanted to take advantage of her. And as people who had seen the experience try to balance their mixed feelings, it became clear that in the midst of violence and hopelessness, the smallest, resilient deeds can pave the way for a fresh start in the days after the horrific event that left Shadow. As the young wolf pup shuddered at the hands of fierce bears, the first fear gave way to a more intricate, multi-layered story that at first seemed to be a terrible, isolated tragedy was progressively dissecting into a network of related subplots, each of which suggests a deeper, additional fundamental issues impacting human societies and the wild that boarded it. As the bear and lynx fight calmed down, and wildlife specialists who arrived at the scene and started to observe minor irregularities in the disturbed ground in addition to the clear indications of a violent. Additionally, there were complex footprint patterns that didn't really correspond to how bears or lynxes normally walk. These odd, subtle, and purposeful trails suggested that there might be a concealed force, possibly even in. The course of events had been impacted by an unidentified predator or startling human intervention, according to a local park ranger, Mr. Similar strangely accurate markings have been seen in other areas of the forest in recent years, Thompson said. He disclosed his tone, and I've seen prints in recent months that almost appear planned. His observations caused his colleagues to become uneasy, expressing a mix of skepticism and worry that a violent encounter could be a component of a broader pattern of disruptions that were not totally natural at the same time as news of the incident circulated throughout the community, the focus shifted from astonishment to an urgent demand for responses during a town hall meeting where local conservationists and homeowners examined whether such violent conflicts were caused by external factors or the harsh forces of nature. Perhaps even human-caused elements are involved. Many people remember similar stories from the historical accounts of wounded wildlife with peculiar injuries and of odd disruptions in the forest that were promptly silenced. These whispers led to a number of local investigations. Activists who started recording further incidents in which wild animals displayed indications of intentional injury. Her mounting anecdotal data indicated that Shadow's experience might not be in. The intrigue is increased by a solitary case that is a part of a larger, unsettling trend. Social media was ablaze with rumors about personal stories, and hashtags like Dark Safe Shadow and Dark Wild Reckoning started to gain popularity among users locally, distributing images of odd animal tracks, strange disturbances in the undergrowth, and even testimonials from. Over the past few weeks, hikers have observed strange activity in the forest. One article went viral and detailed an experience. These digital stories, which included a wounded deer whose wounds reflected the precision observed on Shadow, not only increased public attention while also tying together disparate local experiences that suggested a potential coordinated attempt to control or take advantage of the wildlife in the area amidst this expanding information storm. Dr. Elena Morales, a recluse environmental researcher, contacted Jack A., a local hiker and first responder to the event. Dr. Morales was an expert in the interaction between technology disruption and wildlife behavior at a conference in a tiny, disorganized workplace at. She presented early findings at the local university that raised the prospect of sophisticated tracking devices being utilized in the region. There's proof that some parties are using technology to keep an eye on and disrupt the. She demonstrated JAC data charts and satellite photos that connected with the animal's natural behavior. Her study revealed a terrifying undercurrent if human technology was involved in the strange activities close to the scene of the crime, being employed to control wildlife. Then people with power may have exaggerated or perhaps planned Shadow's pain. In parallel, local historians started to delve into ancient newspaper archives and municipal records. Mr. Redbird, a well-respected elder with an comprehensive understanding of the region's legislation, revealed reports of such instances from decades before. Stories from the past described enigmatic incidents in which wild creatures showed up with exact, nearly surgical wounds. Our forefathers wrote about instances like this when the wild itself was experiencing environmental or societal upheaval, appeared to oppose the exploitation that M. Redbird described at a community lecture. His results gave the probe a deeper historical context, indicating that the current incident could be a part of an ongoing loop of human meddling and nature's frantic, occasionally violent response. In the midst of these layers of historical research, digital activism, and scientific investigation, a subplot developed from within the neighborhood itself, with a group of locals motivated by a number of reasons. The Guardian started claiming that anonymous internet communications posted under a pseudonym, that illegal poaching networks were connected to the violent disruptions in the forest. These signals are unclear but passionately recounted experiences seeing shadowy beings close to the edge of the woodland and demanded a coordinated response to safeguard the area's wildlife. The accusation struck a chord with many who had long harbored misgivings about unregulated. The area's growth and exploitation are intensifying the discussion on how to strike the right balance between preservation and advancement in. Despite these escalating difficulties, Emily's family had already accepted the young wolf Hope into their house following a touching appeal. They were forced to face their own inner struggles. Although the first rescue had inspired unwavering sympathy, the developing subplots raised pragmatic issues. How could they make amends if the erratic forces operating in the jungle now endanger their new friend? These inquiries, which combined their wish to foster hope with the possible threat of wider human intervention, resulted in there were restless nights and heated debates in the home as they considered the obligations of raising a wild organism against the possible threats of a quickly shifting environment. All these interconnected subplots include historical echoes, digital echoes, and scientific revelations. Internal family arguments and activism help to change the story from one solitary act of kindness to a intricate web of interactions between people and the natural world. The tale of Shadow, after being encircled by bears and abandoned on the brink of oblivion, Little Wolf now symbolized a greater conflict. The fight to save the weak in a world where human greed is controlling things more and more. In technology, every new finding increased the investigation's urgency, calling for the community to address both the immediate sorrow and the structural factors that caused this series of events. In motion following the startling incident that left young Shadow, the defenseless wolf pup, perilously close to, on the verge of disaster, the community and those concerned started to struggle with a wave of contradictory feelings. In ethical quandaries, the vicious conflict between the bears and the lynx had thrown the natural order out of balance, leaving not only the untamed predators confused, but also making each observer face the harsh facts of existence in the forest as hints of invisible manipulation coexisted with the severity of nature. There was a conflict between the animal and human worlds that was both internal and external. Jack, who had been leading the investigation, experienced a deep internal conflict in the tumultuous moments after the fight while he examined the evidence and noted his findings by the dark. He was plagued by questions that made it difficult to distinguish between instinct and intention in the light of his campfire. The presence of an obviously planned tracking device and painstakingly created claw scratches suggested intentional brutality. Jack struggled to understand that although the outdoors is naturally cruel, this episode carried a, he wrote in his journal, shadow of human malice. How can something so natural become a tool for exploitation? The more he investigated the riddle, the more he was compelled to do so, his hand shaking with a mix of grief and rage. Question not just the outside factors at work, but also his own empathy and intervention skills in the interim. Officer Ryan's development from a cold enforcer to a sympathetic advocate had been gradually taking shape, became more and more conflicted between his obligations as a professional and Eris's unbridled emotional desire to. After a long day of research, he sat in his small hut and reenacted the scene to safeguard all the creatures who were at risk. Terrifying pictures of the dominant bear that died and the fleeing bear that connects the memories. He was troubled by the memory of that time when even the powerful bear had given in to grief. He muttered to himself, "Every living thing has its breaking point," as he struggled with the realization that although the natural world is frequently uncaring, it can also be controlled by malevolent human hands. His internal struggle was exacerbated by the community's mounting demands for accountability, which conflicted with the institutional requirement for impartial, systematic research in the town. Thus, the argument turned into a miniature representation of this larger internal conflict. Empathetic residents and fervent campaigners called for the arrest and prosecution and demanded prompt action. We must prevent the exploitation of our wilderness by individuals who commit such willful brutality, as demonstrated by this activist, declared voice quivering with outrage, while an opposing group of realistic officials advised prudence, stressing that comprehensive, irrefutable evidence must serve as the basis for any reaction. We run the risk of undermining the very justice we seek if we allow our emotions to rule us. Yet, one council member cautioned that the divergent viewpoints placed many locals in a state of profound conflict. Between Emily's home's gradual, arduous quest for structural transformation and the allure of unadulterated vengeance. The emotional stakes were similarly high in a story where hope had come to represent both resiliency and brutal hope. At first, the newborn wolf's amazing arrival had brought the family together. However, as word of the wider probe spread, the dinner table discussions became serious, and Emily's husband said, increasing awareness of the risks associated with attracting excessive attention to a wild animal when they're kids. Wide-eyed and sympathetic, they begged that every attempt be made to preserve hope. A kid gently tugged at her mother's sleeve and murmured, "I just want her to be safe." This naive plea was brought to light. The personal struggle between the fear of the unknown and the need to nurture, concern that their loved one's safety may one day be in jeopardy due to the erratic and wild forces at work, local media, made the matter even more complicated with the barrage of sensational headlines and heated discussions on social media. The community with opposing viewpoints. Some commentators claimed that the violent incident was only an illustration, reflected the innate cruelty of nature, while others maintained that it was a sign of more pernicious human meddling. With hashtags like wild justice and safe shadow drawing, the online conversation turned into a battlefield of ideas. Praise and scorn in the midst of these online arguments, as well as first-hand accounts from local. Some residents came forward to share eerie recollections of past events that had striking parallels to the present. Tragedy, and some wondering if the increasing violence was a man-made disaster or a natural correction. A recluse environmental researcher named Elena Morales contacted Jack in the midst of all these outside demands. Given information pointing to an unsettling trend of strange wildlife disruptions, her findings suggested that human technology involvement may have contributed to the increase in behavior in the area, offered a scientific counterbalance to the emotional upheaval, but they did little to improve the morale of the society. Suffering if we permit technology to be utilized as a means of controlling nature. In a public setting, she warned against losing the core of what it means to be wild. Her remarks struck a chord with people who were concerned that wildlife exploitation was a purposeful, continuous attack on the raw emotional reactions, all these complex levels and natural order. Officials' cautious pragmatism, digital activism, and scientific analysis came together to produce a significant community's internal crises with every fresh piece of evidence, passionate statement, and whispered. As Jack and Officer Ryan pored over their disagreement, the group's tension increased during the quiet hours of the night. They discovered that the burden of responsibility was pressing down on them, and the fight to keep the weak safe had become a highly personal voyage of self-discovery rather as merely a war against outside forces. Addressing the intricacies of human cruelty and the innate need for compassion in a society that frequently favors strength over empathy when, following the violent incident, the woodland returned to an unsettling calm. The community still had to figure out how to balance the brutal realities of exploitation with the persistent urge for kindness and this internal conflict between adopting and caring. If the foundation of their flawed understanding of the wild and their submission to the ruthless practicality that demanded order. Emotional conundrum, as the inquiry progressed, and the community's emotional reaction to spirits' intentional harm intensified. Unexpected new factors started to surface, increasing the stakes and making things more difficult. The terrifying incidents of that terrible day had already rocked everyone to their foundations. But now, subtle clues and enigmatic clues started to point to the fact that the brutality meted out to the defenseless wolf was. Late one night, Jack was going over the details of a bigger, more unsettling plan. He spotted something odd in one of the most recent photos he took of the clearing. A faint flicker in the distance, close to a group of trees. Initially, he rejected it as a light trick, but further investigation showed a trend. Jack was interested and nervous when the gleam showed up in multiple photos taken over various evenings, leading him to believe that this irregularity could indicate secret monitoring or even the presence of people in a location that was meant to be. Unaffected by contemporary technology, his thoughts were filled with potential. Could the intentional usage of tracking devices be linked to their self-interested forest monitoring? Shortly earlier that same evening, as torrential rain drummed against his temporary camp's window, Jack was given a quick and cryptic text message from an unknown number. Not all. There are wild eyes in the forest, where shadows hide and light never reaches, along with a blurry picture of a. The message sent a chill down his spine in the thicket at the edge of the woodland. Seemed to be an invisible force attempting to convey a hushed warning that the investigation was causing danger. Jack's heart raced as he gazed at the television, aware that the case was about to take a new, sinister turn. In the meantime, Officer Ryan became involved in a heated argument at a community gathering that took place at the Cries for Accountability and Systemic Reform, which had already heated up the local town hall meeting, took on an unexpected twist when Ms. Johnson, a local activist, brought in an anonymous letter she had. Got the letter, signed merely as the Watcher, and scrolled in a weak hand. Asserted that a covert organization was manipulating local wildlife populations for financial gain using cutting-edge technology. Implied that intentional harm, such as that done to spirit, was a part of a planned attempt to manage and we cannot overlook the commercialization of the natural world, Miss Johnson said. Fervently, this indicates that our environment is being exploited on an enormous scale and isn't just about the pain of one animal. Industrial scale. Her remarks resonated deeply, deepening the emotional gap between those who advocated for a methodical investigation approach and others who called for swift retaliation. Local social media erupted with speculations and personal account posts using hashtags throughout these revelations. Locally, people started sharing their personal stories of things like hidden eyes and four secrets, of observing strange patterns of light in the forest and related spooky experiences with people hiding at the edge of. A nature seeker user shared a video clip from a late-night hike on trails, displaying a dark form moving covertly between the woods, a person that appeared too purposeful to be as simple. These digital testimony, Wanderer, offered a chorus of proof that the forest disturbance was not a natural aberration, but it's also a sign of something much darker. Maria Delgado, a solitary local journalist who had established her reputation on Maria, who had been monitoring the internet, approached Jack with fascinating new knowledge about unearthing hidden stories, conversations, and had been able to identify the source of multiple anonymous messages as a group of people connected to. In a discreet meeting with local industrial interests at a tiny cafe close to the edge of the forest, Maria disclosed that she had heard rumors suggesting that a strong local corporation may be responsible for the deployment of surveillance. And do they use technology to monitor and manage wildlife populations? Maybe even control animal behavior. She revealed the purposeful. The injuries we are witnessing may be unintended consequences of a bigger operation to manage the natural resources of this region. And her revelation gave the inquiry a corporate intrigue dimension, implying that the wild resource exploitation was a result of both personal cruelty and the family's once peaceful life at Emily's house was disrupted by her determined economic aspirations. Emily, who had become more protective of Small Hope, had turned Haven into a center of anxious anticipation. Started to observe minor behavioral changes in the cub, and occasionally Hope would stare, focusing attentively on the darkening window, her ears perking up at every sound of the wind, as though she could sense something invisible. Emily questioned whether this behavior, together with the growing tales of enigmatic individuals and cryptic messages, forces outside of their control, could soon encroach on the secure haven they had established. As she juggled her responsibilities as a caring caregiver with her mounting concern that they're active in local gatherings and community forums, compassion may have unintentionally brought harmful attention to the discussion. Started to shift from sporadic instances of cruelty to more extensive conversations regarding debates over privacy monitoring and the commercialization of nature. Questioned whether the local government was doing enough to handle these new dangers, with some locals claiming that human technology was encroaching on the natural world, turning the forest into a battlefield. We must safeguard our wilderness not only from poachers but also from those who would take advantage of it and make money. During a public debate, a community member vehemently protested over all of these subplots, the cryptic inscriptions, the anonymous letters, the enigmatic light abnormalities, and the growing corporate suspicions. Involvement combined to create a complex web of mystery and for. Boeing's straightforward act of a newborn wolf begging for cover has now developed into a complex riddle that every new feature raised concerns about the fundamental nature of human contact with the natural. Jack, as Officer Ryan, and the other members of the task force are compelled by the inquiry to delve further into the hazy interface of exploitation of technology and the environment following the wild bar end. New strands of intrigue started to weave themselves into the Lynx melee that had left Little Shadow perilously close to the restricted narrative as the echoes of the violent encounter subsided, and the woodland gradually returned to its eerie serenity. Witnesses, both human and animal, were forced into a tight quiet as they grappled with the more profound issues that dreadful day. Local wildlife enthusiasts were among the first to voice their concerns. Over the past few months, Laura, an experienced hiker and amateur naturalist, had been recording odd animal behavior. Found a set of strangely patterned tracks close to the clearing where the incident had taken place. These tracks are different from the irregular footprints usually made by lynxes or bears were purposeful and systematic, almost as though someone had been directing or keeping an eye on the predator's movements. Laura informed Jack of her findings, who had been documenting each. Their conversations soon turned into a team effort to map out the abnormalities, as he detailed in his journal, implying that the mayhem may have been a sign of a more elaborately planned event rather than a random act of nature. Disruption. About the same moment, local social media was flooded with reports from posts by locals who claimed to have seen odd things in the woodland using hashtags like Farino Forest Mystery, and people started talking about strange light flashes between the trees and sightings when fog shadows survived. One post by a user entitled Wilderness Watcher described an enigmatic figure that was lurking at the edge of the woodland. Contact with a dark-clad individual who was observed erecting what looked to be surveillance gear next to a well-known. Following these digital testimony raised suspicions in an unexpected way. At a communal gathering, there is a human element purposefully disrupting the natural order. Gathered at the town hall to engage in a heated discussion over the consequences of the assault on local activist Shadow. According to Miss Alvarez, the episode was indicative of a larger trend in animals. She stated that exploitation is about more than simply a bear attack. It's about our ecology being. We must consider who gains when our wildness is used for financial gain. Her statement that creatures are driven to the edge struck a chord with many, sparking conversations about the invasion of. At the same time, Emily combines business interests in the natural world with technology, who, in another story, have been profoundly touched by the earlier events surrounding the rescued baby wolf, reached out to the community to share her knowledge of empathy and cohabitation, even though she had personally experienced one. In an emotional chat with a local, she compared the vulnerability of Shadow to that of gentle rescue. Newspaper, she described how seeing the terror and the ensuing pandemonium had destroyed her preconceived notions about. Every living thing has a story to tell about the wild, which is a lonely and uncaring place. Emily replied quietly, and the struggle of the shadows serves as a reminder that the wild is a dynamic environment that is more than just a place to survive. Environment in which every voice should be heard, contributing to the complex subplots in a solitary. Dr. Helena Morales, an environmental researcher, presented first results. Dr. Morales had been monitoring changes in the forest behavior for the past year at a public forum, pointing out that unusual disruptions appear to be linked to increased human activity in the region, which is not just she described a string of isolated occurrences, but there was a trend that might have been caused by outside forces. Whether it's unlawful monitoring, habitat destruction, or even planned actions meant to take advantage of the data from field surveys and satellite pictures of the forest resources gave scientific credence to the mounting concerns that human intervention was tampering with the natural balance during these developing layers. A personal connection narrative started to emerge, and Jack's commitment to revealing the truth had elevated him to the forefront of the investigation, and he began to receive anonymous messages signed simply the These were enigmatic yet heartfelt messages. Guardian. One letter was read while the forest. The truth is concealed in the shadows of your past. The letters, as you grieve and listen to the whispers of its wounded hearts, brought up memories of Jack's early wilderness experiences and a long-forgotten feeling of. Interestingly, they also alluded to a tradition of folk tales that have been passed down through generations that discussed natural justice and guardian spirits. These enigmatic. By integrating his own background with the objective to reveal the dark forces, communications strengthened Jack's determination. The junction of these subplots is what causes the violence in the community that generated contentious but productive debates. Town hall meetings evolved to become venues where scientific discoveries, historical legislation, and personal tales were hotly contested in some communities. Members recall stories about the forest's alleged ability to communicate mystically through the actions of its creatures. Connection that now appeared frighteningly pertinent. Perhaps what we saw was nature's way of opposing those. During a particularly tense discussion, one elder said, "Who dares to exploit it?" His comments were heavy. Of custom and recollections struck a profound chord with many, confirming the idea that Shadow's experience could be. Amidst an age-old cycle of equilibrium and retaliation, the digital realm also hummed with cooperation as local campaigners, animal lovers, and even skeptics started to present their own data, and social media platforms gave data, images, and videos a place for interpretation. In real-time analysis and discussion of maps, the team's combined efforts not only expanded the scope of the investigation, while also encouraging a sense of solidarity among a varied group of persons committed to prevent the wild from being exploited in this complex web of internet activism, folklore, science, and individual. From a terrifying experience to a metaphor of a larger fight, the story of Shadow's multiple subplots, spanning from corporate exploitation and technological meddling to traditional environmental knowledge and individual rediscovery travels, came together to create a complicated story that questioned accepted notions of nature and urged everyone to reevaluate the delicate relationship between human ambition and the unpredictable nature of the wild as the sounds of the frantic conflict subsided into an unsettling and quiet. The neighborhood and the rescue crews were forced to make a decision. Their strong convictions and racing emotions caused a rift in the dramatic. The ferocious clash of bears and the lynx's unexpected and violent incursion had left Shadow, the defenseless wolf pup, on the verge of extinction. Following that, local wildlife specialists had started working with terror rescuers to secure the puppy, caring for her wounds. But even after the acute emergency passed, a lot more. A complicated conflict was developing between the unadulterated powers of nature and human interference, between the wish to let nature take its course and the pressing necessity of saving a vulnerable life. At a hurriedly planned gathering in the neighborhood community center with representatives from several groups, assembled local government representatives, conservationists, wildlife rehabilitation specialists, and concerned individuals. Everyone sat down, their expressions a mix of surprise, resolve, and apprehension. Jack, a local hiker and one of the first people to see the incident, stood at the head of the room to speak to the audience. His steady but emotionally charged voice described the terrifying sight in which we saw nature at its most vicious, and our tiny Shadow was ensnared in that chaos between the unpredictability of the surge and the unrelenting strength of the wild. Violence. We must now choose whether to intervene and change this natural order or. His remarks instantly sparked a heated argument among activists on one side of the room, allowing the wild to reclaim what it always had. Some proponents of animal welfare criticized the notion that no action should be taken because every life is valuable. Ms. Alvarez, an ardent local activist, contended that we run the risk of losing our future if we let nature take its course. Generations of these amazing animals, and G's assistance is a responsibility of mercy rather than an act of meddling. Many people who had already bonded with Shadow, who is currently receiving care at the rehabilitation facility, found resonance in the passionate plea. A number of sensible officials and seasoned conservationists opposed this vow and warned against overtreating the forest. Operates under its own laws, as noted by Councilman Harris, whose calm but authoritative tone prevented him from acting too forcefully. Disturb the natural balance. We must exercise caution, since nature has harsh cycles, not to force our human ideals on a system that predates us by a great deal. His remarks caused some people to voice their disapproval, as they felt that nature in all its apathy shouldn't be. As the argument raged, it was either idealized or protected from its intrinsic harshness. When an anonymous email signed by the Guardian was displayed on the screen, the tension increased. The message read, "When the human hands disturb the nature, leaving deeper scars than you may think. Protect the innocent, but be ready for." Grainy pictures of comparable disruptions in various regions of the world, along with mysterious text depicting nature's wrath. Forrest gave the conversation a terrifying dimension, and the email alluded to a wider pattern of abuse as an indication that Shadow's experience may not be a singular occurrence, but rather a troubling trend. As the ramifications of this message spread across the ecosystem, the room became even more divided as a group of Dr. Elena Morales and other local academics contended that the incidence of such severe disturbances indicated outside intervention, and we have observed odd patterns that are nearly. Her voice resonated with both as she said, engineered injuries on wildlife that hint at deliberate manipulation. Whether there is a connection between scientific authority and individual concern, her findings gave weight to the possibility that our forest fate is intertwined with facts that go beyond natural predation. The notion that human interests, sometimes motivated by wealth or selfishness, were interfering. Considering the natural order among these intense arguments, Emily, the kind homeowner, had opened. Listened carefully to her door to the newborn wolf in a prior touching rescue. Her face was marked with concern and determination as she recalled the incredible moment when hope entered her life. The growing threat of unchecked exploitation of environment has overshadowed home, and I understand how it feels to witness. During a calmer part of the discussion, she said gently, a creature in pain and to feel helpless, but I also think that, in addition to saving these lives, careful intervention can establish a standard for how we handle our wild. Despite her mild tone, her remarks conveyed an unwavering resolve that encouraged a lot of people around her, and the argument heated up when one of the local police officers, obviously alarmed by the growing proof of possible human intervention, it was proclaimed if these allegations of intentional meddling are true, then our silence can be interpreted as collaboration. Must take prompt action to expose the entire extent of this exploitation and guarantee that no more innocent lives are at risk. However, his demands for a thorough probe ran against the demands for prompt rescue and action, laying the groundwork for a pivotal moment. The divergent viewpoints of those promoting an prompt, caring rescue of boar and those advocating for a systematic, evidence-based. In that tense time, the strategy to preserve the natural order struck a dead end. It became evident that the choice would not be simple, and the community had to face the agonizing question of whether should the harsh facts of nature be ignored, or should intervention take precedence over them. Frequently harsh path, even at the cost of weaker life like Shadow's. Tension was evident when the conference came to an end, and attendees left the community center with heavy hearts and more profound inquiries. The woodland still reverberating with the remains stood as a mute testament to the ongoing struggle between empathy and the natural world. Order, the eerie evidence, the passionate arguments, and the anonymous message all indicated a certain outcome, and Shadow's fate was now representative of a more extensive conflict that required the society to face the dark as well as protect the weak, and interconnected human exploitative forces that posed a danger to the fragile natural equilibrium under a. The group assembled once more at the exact clearing where the storm's strong remnants were still visible in the sky. After a violent confrontation, the area left scarred by nature's cruelty was used as a set for a ultimate encounter, the point at which every bit of information, every muttered charge, and every request for justice. Officer Ryan, Emily, Jack, and the other members of the task force stood together with their faces uncovered, filled with grief and resolve, prepared to make the choices that would determine their wild and their. Community Jack came up with a battered folder that held all of the evidence that had been gathered over the high-resolution images from previous weeks showing the exact claw marks, the tracking device fragment, and the torn cloth that had suggested intentional manipulation. "So this isn't a coincidence," he said, his voice heavy but steady with. "Every element reveals deliberate cruelty, and we now have indisputable evidence that someone has been meddling with our wildlife and using it for control or financial gain. We decide today." The room exploded in nods and whispers as everyone realized that this could no longer be allowed. Everyone in attendance was affected by Jack's remarks, especially Officer Ryan, whose journey from a. Many people were moved by his transformation from a cold enforcer to a caring advocate, and his eyes were wet with. With a wave of resolution, Ryan told the assembled crowd that our mission is not just to respond to the harshness of nature, but in order to combat human brutality that aims to control it, we must submit formal. Our goal is clear: to receive complaints and demand an impartial inquiry into these willful acts of abuse. As the discussion simmered, local advocate Mark Rivera defended the weak, restored equilibrium, and made sure that justice was served. The investigative journalist calmly and purposefully presented his final dossier, revealed a pile of papers, including financial records, anonymous documents, and internal memoranda. Testimony that linked a network of illicit wildlife operations to a prominent local businessman. Records show that Mark's measured yet forceful tone betrays a pattern of abuse. Intentional campaign that harms helpless animals like Spirit and takes advantage of our natural resources. The evidence is a striking indictment of a corrupt system and is not circumstantial. His presentation shocked everyone in the room, and many people nodded fervently as the damning details were. Soon, the mood became tense as local animal advocates rose to profit. One activist declared, "We cannot allow our wilderness to be desecrated for profit," voice trembling with rage and resolve, "because every living thing in this forest is precious, and we have a duty." Today's intervention to safeguard it is a passionate stand for all creatures that have been exploited or ignored. The community's members, who had long felt helpless in the face of such a situation, overwhelmingly supported the plea. Systemic cruelty. Yet in the midst of the demand for prompt action, several local senior council members' face is lined with experience. So officials advised him to exercise cautious. And anxiety speaks softly, but the data is strong. So we need to make sure that our decisions are informed by indisputable evidence and due process. Hastening to render a decision without conducting a thorough examination could have unanticipated consequences. We must strike a balance between our moral obligation and the legal requirements. His statements, while measured, presented a crucial counterpoint to the raging wave of emotional protest during a pivotal time of decision-making. The task committee suggested two approaches. First, they would provide official legal accusations against the parties involved, using the substantial evidence to start a thorough inquiry. At the same time, they would establish an impartial oversight group made up of wildlife specialists, attorneys, professionals, community activists, and local indigenous group members to keep an eye on the issue and create long-term regulations that would protect the forest. Jack's voice boomed as he clarified that we have two aims for both instant responsibility for these willful acts of cruelty and long-term change that safeguards our wild. Our strategy needs to be detailed and quick for the next generation of. The community's reaction was a combination of thoughtful nods and enthusiastic applause. The choice signaled a shift in direction and a shared pledge to resist human greed and apathy. Continue to undermine nature's delicate balance. Officer Ryan's eyes were full of resolve matched those of his co-workers, adding that we are united today to destroy this exploitation network and allow our deeds to serve as the lighthouse that leads to the transformation we so richly deserve. As the conference came to an end, we offered up our spirits to all injured animals and to ourselves. While the gathered audience started to disperse into the evening's downpour, the obvious sense of solidarity and there was a sense of resolve. So the task force started working right away. Teams started creating official complaints, and private detectives were called in to follow up on each lead social. Supportive posts using hashtags like Wild Justice and Protect Our Wilderness flooded the media, echoing the Jack stayed by the area for a while after everyone had left, demonstrating the community's shared dedication to the cause. In the tranquil aftermath, he kept his eyes focused on the ancient oak that had silently observed the turbulent events, felt the energizing promise of a fresh start we've taken, as well as the crushing weight of obligation. He whispered the first crucial step, and now that the real work has begun, his words were a personal commitment to tenaciously pursue justice and guarantee that no more lives are lost, would be taken advantage of in the shadows. This last encounter was more than a matter of revenge. It was a proclamation of a community bound together by compassion, tenacity, and a common goal of a time when, with the legal actions taken and the oversight, every life was valued. Committee was established, and the way forward was obvious. A persistent team effort to re-establish equilibrium and illuminate the most obscure areas of exploitation when twilight fell on the woodland. A thick, nearly deafening hush descended upon the clearing where the terrible altercation had taken place, that had caused Shadow, the young wolf pup, to shudder in the midst of the strewn-about remnants of the altercation. Now prepared the way for the last crucial moment, when all wildlife photographers' witnesses were concealed. Naturalists and rescuers from the area who had hurried to the scene felt the weight of the imminent resolution. The forest that had previously been alive with the noises of violence and panic now appeared to hold its breath in that tense atmosphere. Jack and I had a moment of uncanny, anticipatory quiet. With their faces lit by the gentle illumination, Officer Ryan and his colleagues gathered around the location. With portable lamps and the sporadic lightning strikes, the ground remained muddy due to the previous commotion, leaving signs of violence engraved deeply into the pliable earth, serving as a vivid reminder of the violent conflict between the untamed might of nature and the unpredictable forces had come together that day. And the only sound to break the stillness was the distant, fading echo of roars, and the soft, melancholy sound of the wind rustling through the trees, like though the forest itself was lamenting the bloodshed that had happened. Jack took a long breath, and his gaze scanned the disturbed clearing. And onto the stage, we have recorded every word he spoke, his voice both resolute and trembling with passion. Every mark and every piece of broken evidence point to the same conclusion. Shadow got entangled in a power struggle between predators, as well as a battle of nature, and now we're at the brink of anarchy to choose whether we should let nature run its course or step in to bring things back into balance. And his words, protect the vulnerable, reverberated in the thick air, urging everyone to face the hard facts that had. Officer Ryan stood next to him, barefaced, and added with a steely resolve that belied his earlier. We've witnessed the cruelty and experienced the dread, but right now, Shadow's destiny depends on our decision. Do we allow nature's vicious cycle go unchecked, or do we stand up for something more that respects the sanctity of life, no matter how tiny? His eyes skimmed over the faces of several of them. Others were softened by the recollection of compassion shown that day, while others were hardened by loss. The storm overhead briefly broke through, sending a piercing ray of light through as if to punctuate what they were saying. The team's expressions and the silhouettes of a devastated area in the fleeting glow of the dense canopy were disclosed in stark detail. It was a time when all feelings were exposed, including sorrow for the brutality, created resentment at the powers that had influenced nature, and a glimmer of hope that by taking firm action, they might but alter destiny. At that crucial moment, a voice from the crowd shuddering with urgency rose to speaking. Emily's act of kindness was what initially gave the newborn wolf hope. We cannot let this brutality be the conclusion of the story, she said, piercing the door of her house. Today, in tense quiet, we decide to defend those who are unable to defend themselves. Today, we determine that the outdoors is a place where compassion may tip the balances and not a place where unfettered cruelty exists. Restore equilibrium, Her passionate remarks produced a hush among the gathered audience, strengthening the resolve. It had started to solidify over the previous few weeks at that precise time, and unanticipated. One of the local wildlife experts saw a development that would push the matter into its last, crucial stage. Du Rivera came out with a waterproof folder with recently acquired data and thorough maps demonstrating recent images and odd animal movement patterns that showed a disturbance in the natural hierarchy of. Dr. Rivera said in a calm tone, "We have reason to believe that these violent disturbances aren't random in the forest. However, they are part of a larger, planned disruption of the natural order, a manipulation that." Her comment brought to light a threat that not only jeopardizes the lives of animals like Shadow, but also the equilibrium of our ecosystem. On the interaction, turning it from a terrible accident into a structural problem that called for prompt and decisive action as the task force felt the impact of Dr. Rivera's remarks. Exchanged resolute looks. The group's grief and rage blended with a fresh feeling of. The group was now faced with the difficult decision of whether to continue to tolerate the harsh cycles of nature, either to continue unchallenged or to use their combined might to stop the destructive forces at play and to protect the wild's future in the last heart-stopping scenes of that meeting. As the storm's rage gave way to a hesitant, composed Officer Ryan and the rain subsided to a light drizzle, said again, his tone firm and full of the promise of vengeance, "We must take action now that we have witnessed the cruelty, experienced the suffering, and obtained the necessary proof." Shadow, but his words reverberate for all creatures that have been taken advantage of by a system that prioritizes power over life. The old oak, and echoing across the clearing, solidified the choice in everyone's minds with that statement. The tension peaked at a point of unity where the community, armed with facts and motivated, driven by a strong sense of moral obligation, ready to begin the last stage of their fight for justice, the future of the forest, Shadow's destiny, and the possibility of a new, caring cohabitation now rested on the precipice. As the sun rose over the horizon, the fate of those who dared to defy the existing quo will be decided by their resolute acts. A deep peace descended upon the village as the forest's first warm rays softly dispelled the last of the darkness. A serenity derived from both grief and unwavering hope after the turbulent events that had. Shadow had shook everyone's emotions as it unfolded around the young wolf pup, leaving a lasting impression on the natural environment and on the human spirit, starting with a terrifying incident in which bears surrounded the defenseless puppy. The story, which had been followed by a violent turn and an intense encounter, had finally come to a climax that was as much about accountability in the stillness as it was about recovery and rejuvenation. Following the incident, the task force members, under the direction of Jack Officer Ryan and assisted by fervent campaigners, wildlife specialists, and members of the local community, considered the path they had traveled. Careful documentation of the heated arguments at town hall meetings, the valiant confrontations in all of the woodland had helped me uncover a more profound reality. Cruelty in the wild is not. This realization is sometimes the result of intentional human exploitation rather than being entirely a result of nature's apathy. Agonizing because it brought the society together with a common goal to save the weak and repair the sensitive equilibrium of the ecosystem. Officer Ryan, whose development from one of the most admirable parts of the experience had been the transformation from a cold enforcer to a caring guardian. Prior to an audience of supporters at the recently created wildlife sanctuary, a profound comprehension was expressed by eyes that were still shining from the remembrance of that last, daring moment in the clearing. He remarked softly that their task was far from done and that we had witnessed the savagery. And although we have made our first firm moves, our trip is far from over. We must remain together in order to hold those who would take advantage of our natural environment accountable and to make sure that. His remarks struck a chord, not only as a plea for justice, but also as a reminder that every life is valued. Resolved to protect all animals, from the largest bear to the tiniest, in order to preserve the wild's future. Jack, the puppy who had now recorded every terrifying event in his journal, gave a moving statement at a local animal memorial service, sharing his thoughts with the community. Affected by the exploitation, he remembered the day that violence tore the forest apart and uncertainty. That day, Jack started speaking in a steady yet sorrowful tone. Observe the harsh side of nature. But we also saw the beginning of resistance as shadows battled the bear's havoc, and even the silent supplication in each creature's eyes served as a reminder that even in the most dire circumstances, when hope arises, it is our responsibility to foster it so that there is no. His remarks were full of unfiltered emotion, but life is lost to the schemes of avarice. His perseverance gave many audience members a fresh sense of direction. After sensationalizing the violent incidents, the local media now focused on the communities. Editorials and feature articles with outstanding responses started to highlight the social media was buzzing about the value of compassion and the strength of group action in combating systemic brutality. With encouraging remarks and appeals for ongoing attention using hashtags like Wild Justice and Protect Our Wild. Once split by divergent viewpoints, the online community came together to embrace the idea that every act of kindness might cause a systemic shift in a sentiment that went viral online. Platforms for Emily, whose house had been used as a makeshift wildlife sanctuary. The experience had gotten very intimate as she contemplated the various ways the wild had impacted her life while peacefully sitting on her porch. Beauty, its cruelty, and its ability to motivate change. I've discovered that Emily revealed in a community interview that being wild is not a distinct world, but rather a fundamental aspect of who we are. A bear's defiance, a small pup's bravery, and even the sadness that pervaded that tumultuous moment have demonstrated to me how our destiny is entwined with nature's, and we must respect, preserve, and allow it to help us move toward a more humane future in the weeks following the court cases and independent. The task force's investigation started to yield results, and the implicated parties who had previously been shielded by an air of respectability were now confronted with the full. Town hall gatherings saw the proposal of new policies intended to serve as a force of public scrutiny and legal responsibility, keeping wildlife from being exploited and making sure that any interference with nature was dealt with quickly and decisively. Action, the community's combined efforts had ignited a movement that aimed to revolutionize how, in order to prevent cruelty of any kind from ever flourishing, society connected with a natural environment. Uncontrolled as the neighborhood gradually accepted this new phase of reform and resiliency. All participants, including local activists and skeptic officials, acknowledged that the shadow narrative was much more than just this tragic tale served as a light of hope, illuminating the way to justice and a reminder that one act of kindness can light a spark even in the face of overwhelming darkness. Of change, we appreciate your participation in this life-changing exploration. Shadow's tale of justice and tenacity, as well as the potent movement that has. If it has moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below. We want you to consider how each act of kindness makes the world a more hopeful and equitable place in the comment section below. Planet for all living things. And check back soon for more motivational tales that honor the unbreakable ties between. Together, humans and nature can continue to preserve and cultivate our wild areas. There is hope everywhere in the world.